Welcome back to the deep dive. I've always found coma stories fascinating, maybe a little unsettling too. Just the idea of waking up in a strange place, unable to move or speak, with only fragments of memory, it's both terrifying and intriguing. Today we're diving deep into a personal account of just that, a first-hand story of waking up from a 5-week coma after a life-altering event.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. And what really strikes me is how immediately we're placed in the narrator's shoes. 17 years old, waking up in isolation, completely bandaged from neck to toe. That sensory deprivation alone, that can have profound psychological effect.
You're right, the source mentions being allowed only one visitor at a time, and even they had to be completely covered in sterile garments. I'm curious, from a medical standpoint, why such extreme measures?
Well, it suggests a very high risk of infection, indicating that the narrator's injuries were quite severe. Extensive burns, perhaps, or major trauma requiring multiple surgeries. This level of isolation is meant to create a completely sterile environment to protect the patient during the critical early stages of recovery.
Okay. The source describes their mother visiting for days, trying to get them to wake up. But it's only when the father visits that they regain consciousness. The source describes him as sobbing behind the slightest glimpse of a smile. What a complex reaction.
It's a poignant detail. I think it hints at the immense stress the family must have been under. 5 weeks is a long time to be in a coma, and they were likely facing a roller coaster of emotions. Fear, hope, despair. The father's tears could be a release of that pent-up tension, mixed with the overwhelming relief of seeing their child finally awake.
Makes sense. The source describes their initial confusion and fear,
Mm.
trying to speak,
Yeah.
but being unable to due to the ventilator. I imagine that must be incredibly frustrating, on top of everything else they were going through.
Absolutely. The inability to communicate, especially in such a disorienting and frightening situation, it can exacerbate feelings of anxiety and helplessness. Think about it. You're waking up in a strange place, your body feels alien, you can't speak, and you have no idea what happened. That's a recipe for severe psychological distress.
So how do they even begin to piece together what happened?
Well, the source relies on a dry erase board to communicate with their father. It's through these fragmented exchanges that we start to get glimpses of the events leading up to the coma.
Right. The father mentions an evening after school, a doctor's appointment the next morning, then a sudden rush to the ER. It all seemed to happen so quickly.
Yes, and that rapid decline suggests a serious medical event, perhaps a sudden illness or a traumatic injury. The details are still unclear at this point. Adding to the suspense of the narrative, we as listeners are left wondering, along with the source, just what could have caused such a dramatic turn of events.
The father then reveals that the source spent 3 weeks in the ICU before being transferred to another hospital for the induced coma. Now, I'm no medical expert, but I know inducing a coma isn't a decision made lightly.
You're absolutely right. An induced coma is usually reserved for cases where the body has undergone extreme trauma or requires extensive medical intervention. It allows the body to focus its energy on healing and reduces the risk of further complications.
So the coma itself is a sign of just how serious the situation was.
Precisely. And while the father frames it as necessary for surgical procedures and recovery, those terms, while accurate, don't fully convey the gravity of the situation. Internal and external damage, as the source later describes it, suggests a level of physical trauma that's difficult to comprehend.
Yeah. The source mentions feeling confused by everyone's joy, not understanding how they could be happy, given the dire circumstances.
That's a really insightful observation. It highlights the different perspectives at play here. For the family, seeing their loved one emerge from a coma, it's a victory, a reason for immense relief and gratitude. But for the source, waking up to a new and frightening reality, the journey is just beginning. They're facing a long and uncertain road to recovery, both physically and emotionally.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We've started to unravel the mystery of the coma, but many questions remain unanswered. What exactly happened that night? What will the unfiltered story reveal? And how will the source navigate the challenges of their recovery?
These are questions we'll explore as we continue our deep dive into this remarkable story of trauma, resilience, and the search for truth.
We left off with the source grappling with the enormity of their situation. Waking up from a coma is one thing, but piecing together the fragmented memories and coming to terms with the extent of their injuries, that's an entirely different challenge.
Yeah, it's almost like they're waking up to a new reality, a reality where their body feels unfamiliar, their memories are hazy, and the people around them almost seem to be speaking in code.
The source describes their body as being destroyed from the inside out. That's such a visceral and powerful image. What does that even mean from a medical perspective?
Well, it suggests extensive internal damage, which could involve multiple organ systems. We know they were in the ICU for 3 weeks before being placed in the induced coma, which indicates a critical condition requiring constant monitoring and life support. The type of damage could range from internal bleeding and organ failure to severe infections or trauma to the skeletal structure.
And to make matters worse, they don't seem to be getting straight answers about their injuries. They sense there's more to the story than what the father is revealing.
Right. That's a common experience for trauma survivors, especially those who've been unconscious for an extended period. They're waking up to a new reality. But the information they're receiving, it's often filtered or delayed, sometimes as a way to protect them from the full weight of this situation.
But that lack of information can also create anxiety and distrust. The source even questions their father's account, thinking, "Did you hear the story you just told me? Look at me. I am about to die. I am not in a happy situation."
Yeah, that disconnect between the source's perception and the family's reaction, that's really fascinating. It highlights the psychological complexity of trauma recovery. While the family is focused on celebrating their loved one's survival, the source is struggling to reconcile their reality with the optimistic outlook being presented to them.
The source seems acutely aware of their fragility, their nearness to death. They mention damaged tissue being removed. This paints a rather grim picture.
Yes, and it underscores the fact that their recovery is far from guaranteed. The source is facing an uphill battle, both physically and emotionally. They're having to confront their own mortality, the possibility of long-term disability, and the uncertainty of what the future holds.
And all of this is happening while they're still struggling to communicate, relying on a dry erase board to express their thoughts and fears.
Right. That limited communication adds another layer of frustration and isolation. Imagine trying to process such a traumatic experience, to ask difficult questions, to express your deepest fears, all through the slow and laborious process of writing on a dry erase board.
It must feel like they're trapped inside their own head, with no way to fully express what they're going through.
Exactly. And that sense of isolation can be incredibly damaging to the recovery process. It's essential for trauma survivors to feel heard and understood, to have a safe space to process their emotions and share their fears.
The source mentions their desire to go home, to see their friends, to get back to some semblance of normalcy, but that seems like a distant dream at this point.
It is a distant dream, and that realization must be incredibly difficult to process. The source is mourning the loss of their former life, the life that was abruptly interrupted by this traumatic event. They're grieving for the experiences they've missed, the milestones they may never reach, the future that now seems uncertain.
And yet, despite all of this, the source shows incredible resilience. They're not passive in their recovery. They're actively seeking answers, pushing back against the filtered narrative they're being given, demanding to know the unfiltered story.
Right. That's a testament to their strength of character. They're not content with a sanitized version of events. They want the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to hear. That drive to uncover the truth, to reclaim their own narrative, that's a powerful force in their recovery.
It's almost as if they understand that facing the full reality of their situation, however painful, is essential for moving forward.
You've hit the nail on the head. By seeking the unfiltered story, the source is taking control of their own healing process. They're acknowledging the trauma, confronting the difficult questions, and demanding agency in their own recovery. That's a powerful message, not just for other trauma survivors, but for all of us as we navigate the challenges of life.
It's inspiring, really, to see such strength and determination in the face of unimaginable adversity. It makes you wonder what the unfiltered story will reveal and how the source will ultimately use this experience to shape their future.
That's the question that hangs over the narrative, isn't it? What will the truth reveal? And how will the source integrate that truth into their journey of healing and self-discovery?
It feels like we're on the edge of a revelation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
We've journeyed with the source through their disorientation, their struggle to communicate, their growing suspicion that there's more to the story than they're being told.
It's a classic narrative setup, the quest for the hidden truth. But in this case, the stakes are incredibly high. This isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about the source reclaiming their own narrative, understanding the event that has so profoundly reshaped their life.
Right, and it makes you think about the nature of truth itself.
Right.
How often do we accept a filtered version of events, whether it's from our families, the media, or even our own memories?
That's a profound question. We all construct narratives to make sense of the world, to create order out of chaos. But sometimes those narratives can obscure the full picture. And in the case of trauma, uncovering the unfiltered truth, however painful it may be, that can be essential for healing.
The source's determination to uncover that truth is inspiring. They're not content to be a passive recipient of someone else's version of their story. They're actively seeking answers, challenging assumptions, demanding agency in their own recovery.
That active engagement is a key indicator of resilience. It's a sign that they're not letting the trauma define them. They're choosing to confront it head on, to integrate it into their understanding of themselves and their world.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has an incredible capacity for growth and transformation. We can choose to let adversity break us, or we can choose to use it as fuel for growth, to become stronger and more resilient in the face of life's challenges.
And that choice, that act of reclaiming one's narrative, that's ultimately what empowers us to move forward. It allows us to find meaning in our experiences, to connect with others who have faced similar challenges, and to become advocates for ourselves and others.
So as we conclude our deep dive into this extraordinary story, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of acknowledging the complexity of trauma recovery. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, and what might seem like a positive outcome to one person can be the beginning of a long and arduous journey for another.
It's also a reminder that seeking truth, however challenging it may be, is essential for healing and growth. Whether it's the truth about a traumatic event, the truth about ourselves, or the truth about the world around us, confronting those truths head-on can be incredibly liberating.
And finally, I think this story highlights the power of resilience, the ability to find strength and meaning in the face of adversity. The source's journey is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for growth, transformation, and ultimately triumph over trauma.
It's a story that will stay with me, that's for sure.
Hmm.
And I encourage our listeners to seek out the full source material if they're interested in delving deeper into this remarkable journey of recovery and self-discovery. This deep dive has only scratched the surface of a much larger story, a story that continues to unfold with every question asked, every truth revealed.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deep dives that challenge and inspire us all.